But I then discovered how the system is able to maintain 100% matric pass rate.
Yeah.
I walked into a school, started teaching there, found out that in the first term of the year, they were already writing down a list of learners who they thought would not survive and make it in the school. And then they would literally call in the parents and give them referral letters and say, you need to take your child to another school. And this is at grade 8 level, by the way. This is the first term of this kid being in high school. And upon my discovery, I found that a lot of these children would be children whose parents are domestic workers working in this community, and their children did not have a very good, maybe primary school education.
Welcome to Young and Proud Educators, KKG, and we're back at it.
Sad to say, my first encounter in the teaching space was one in which I did not want to teach in the township initially. I wanted to go to your Model C schools, and that's where I rushed off to.
Yeah.
And when I got into that space, sad to say, I entered that space and discovered that it wasn't the beauty that I had painted out.
Yeah.
The beauty of inter-highs and extramural activities and classes with a limited number of students and all of that. Yes, I arrived and found those, 20 learners in a class and all of that, found that. But I then discovered how the system is able to maintain 100% matric pass rate. I walked into a school, started teaching there, and found out that in the first term of the year, they were already writing down a list of learners who they thought would not survive and make it in the school. And then they would literally call in the parents and give them referral letters and say, you need to take your child to another school. And this is at grade 8 level, by the way. This is the first term of this kid being in high school. And upon my discovery, I found that a lot of these children would be children whose parents are domestic workers working in this community, and their children did not have a very good, maybe primary school education, therefore come into this high school and are not able to meet the standards. And teachers would not be willing to work hard on this child. They'd rather refer them to another school because they were not going to cope in the school. And because they'll obviously affect the results of the school, the 100% pass that they always put out there every single year. And in addition to that, obviously, they'd rather get a fee-paying parent into the school rather than to have this child of a domestic worker. And that's what I encountered. And I tried to fight it tooth and nail, and it was a losing battle because in the school where I was working, for example, I was the only black male teacher, and the other black teachers were 3 female teachers who all were teaching isiZulu. So to some extent, I felt as if I was not needed. They could do away with me and replace me. And to prove my statement, the very day when I had put in my retirement and was leaving, the very same day my replacement, not retirement rather, my resignation, the very same day my replacement was already there. And so that was my experience. I walked into the space, discovered that it was a space which was not intending on supporting me, but rather a space which expected from me to meet their already existent norms and standards. For example, I'd be traveling from Soweto going to work, and I'd say to them, if you set up a meeting at about 7 a.m., I will not make it. But if you can shift the meeting to 7:30, I'll make it to the meeting. And there'd be a refusal to shift the meeting to 7:30. It would be, you better make it. And you arrive 5 minutes late, and you got a warning for being late. So I walked into the space and found that the space had its own norms and standards that I had to meet up to. Mind you, if I have to make it for a meeting at 7 o'clock, I'd have to leave home at 5 a.m. I'm not waking up to get a shower at 5 a.m. I'm leaving the house to make it in time, taking maybe 2 taxis and a bus to get to work. So that's how I entered into the education space, discovered all of those things. Sometimes they'd say, okay, we're going to stay over for marking. And you find that Marking is going to start at 5 p.m. From 5 p.m., we're going to start marking and we're going to sit together as the teachers and mark. But if we're going to sit from 5 p.m., school knocks off at 2:30. In other words, from 2:30 till 5 p.m., I have to sit around at school. I can't leave, go home, and come back. That's impossible for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd sometimes have to sit from school. I've been there since maybe 7:30 in the morning, and I'm going to be at school until 9 p.m. at night. And then my dad has to drive and come and pick me up. And luckily, I had a father who, at that particular point, had a car and
Yeah.
would have been able to come and pick me up. But in the mornings, it would be impossible for him to come and drop me off at work majority of the time because he himself was working. So it was that type of a complication, entering into the working space and discovering that it was never designed to accommodate a person who comes from a disadvantaged background.
Yeah.
It was not designed to accommodate. So yeah, eventually, about a couple of months down the line, I quit my job. I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the pressure. I couldn't take the stress. And at the point at which I quit my job, I was already seeing a doctor and they were telling me I have to be on antidepressants. And I said to them, before this job, I didn't need them.
Oh man.
So instead of taking antidepressants, I quit my job.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've never had to use antidepressants by God's grace.
Since you left.
But yeah, I had to reclaim my life, basically.
Sure. Wow. You remind me of the conversation I had with one of my friend. It's on YouTube. We spoke about the private schools and how they were not so designed for black people, for black teachers. So it's a full-on conversation where we just breaking down and just dissect it. But but you touched on a very important point. Because I'm teaching the primary school, so I have no idea of that. To say the schools get 100% year in, year out, but it's what they use in, like, they exclude children, I don't know, academically or based on what. So it's intentional exclusion to say we 100%, you cannot give it to us.
It's very intentional.
But how do we do it
Down in
in the
the
democratic society that we live in our country?
Look, democracy as a term, democracy as a term speaks
Yeah.
to freedom, okay? And that freedom was almost like wanting to be warmed by a painted fire. And as I always say this, we have received political freedom.
Yeah.
But as for economic freedom, we haven't received economic freedom. And I want you to realize this: education is directly linked to economics. you know, and you cannot have a capitalist system continue to run without the education leg of it. And I want you to understand that the education leg of the capitalist system that we're living in is intended to produce two types of crop. The one crop is those who are going to continue to be the owners of the means of production, and usually that comes from your minority group, the people who have access to opportunities and all of that, and the other group, which is a crop that is literally being produced just to be laborers.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And the system does not want everyone to be trained to become a CEO of a company. In all honesty, the system wants some people to leave school and not really have much of a qualification so that they can be cleaners,
Yeah.
you know, so that they can be the tea lady, so that they can be the gardener, So basically, I think the system was not intended to produce uh, an A student in every single child, to
Yeah.
identify the full potential of every single child. That's not its intention. And so, if you go back into it and say, how can this be happening in a democratic system? I want you to understand that we are living in a democratic system that is very much capitalistic, and because it is capitalistic, it has to continue to perpetuate the system which we had already inherited from the previous regime. You know, yeah.
So what you're saying is, schools are literally maintaining and perpetuating the injustices of the past. To say, you, the poor, go this side. You the rich go this side, and now they're not using race as the big thing. They're using money, academics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, the what you find is that money can buy you opportunities.
Mm.
And as you go, depending which school you go to,
Yeah.
depending the kind of uh, the cost of education,
Mm.
I mean, the reality of it is go to a non-fee paying school, like where I'm teaching currently. In a non-fee paying school, you still have overcrowded classes. In a non-fee paying school, you still have children who are using a tattered textbook. Literally, the textbook is tattered and it's passed on to the next child every single year, passed on to the next child. And only once it's totally ripped apart and it's like in the worst condition, then the school will say, okay, we need to order a new textbooks, And basically, it's in a system in which that child in a non-fee paying school, it's very difficult for them to have individual attention. I mean, just last year, um, I had a class with 72 learners in it, grade 8.
That's
72 learners. And
that's
when you
large.
ask yourself, where's the teacher learner ratio? Is there a policy, is there a law that says what is the actual teacher learner ratio supposed to be? And is there someone who comes into schools and checks the teacher learner ratio? You know, and mind you, the accepting of grade 8 into a school was not done by teachers, was not done by the clerks in our schools. It's done by our government because the
Yeah.
government says they must apply online,
Yeah.
and then the government is the one allocating people to schools to say this number of learners will go to this school, to that school. So, for example, in the school where I teach, you find that the overall number of students that's supposed to be in that school is about 800, but we're sitting with 1,500 learners overall,
And you have to
in
find
grade.
space for the 200 plus 300 children. You have to find space for them.
Yeah. Actually, as I said, it's 800 and we're sitting with almost 1.5. So that's literally about
Oh, I
700
didn't
extra
get that.
children. Yeah, that's about 700 extra. It's almost double the amount. So basically, and in grade 8, for example, as an educator, I teach grade 8 English, and I was teaching the whole, not was, even now, I'm still teaching the whole of grade 8. That's over 300 learners that I alone teach. So if you ask me, was it developed for me as a teacher to be able to give individual attention to a learner and get the best out of them? No, it wasn't. So if you can pay for education and get private school education, you're sitting in a situation where you are the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
You're sitting in a class where maybe there's 10 to 20, 25 learners, maybe 30 if it's a big class, and
Mm.
the teacher's able to give individual attention.
Mm.
Um, I mean, why in this day and age I was still using chalk? I did a research on chalk and blackboard. That's more than 200 years old.
That's old.
Chalk and a blackboard should be sitting in a museum, and we should be making reference to it. That in the olden days, teachers used to use that thing, and learners should be saying, "What is that?"
Yeah.
It should be something they see and get fascinated on at it. Like, wow, you actually can do that? Is that a stone? What is this thing? But we're still using it till this day. And I'm not
Mm.
trying to say our government isn't trying. They've started rolling out programs where they're introducing smart boards in schools and things like that.
Mm.
But even that program is not properly thought out because
Yeah.
you're rolling out smart boards. Meanwhile, you've got educators in the system who are very old and are allergic to technology. So, yeah, as I said, the system is not developed and made out for every single learner to perform at their ultimate best. You know, and as Howard Gardner would mention, one of the theories that I really, really find to be very relevant, Howard Gardner speaks about multiple intelligence. The system is looking at linguistic intelligence,
Yeah.
it's looking at mathematical intelligence. All other intelligences, such as musical intelligence, such as kinetic intelligence,
Yeah.
and many other intelligence types, people who have got a natural a link to maybe nature, a person who's able to handle dogs and animals and doing things like planting and all of that, all
It
of
is.
those others are ignored. They basically ignored. I mean, if you from my area, for example, if you say a child is musically intelligent and
Yeah.
wants to study music, it's most of us will tell you go to National School of the Arts, but that school can't take every single child, and that school is all the way in town.
Yeah.
Right here in Soweto, if you ask who's got music as a subject that they can do in grade 10, 11, and 12, very, very few schools, if any. Actually, at the top of my head, I can't even think of one art school in Soweto, you know. And that's why I say the system was not designed to accommodate and get the best out of every single individual learner.
It was just maintaining the top part of it and maintaining
Yeah.
again what society is. That we need to have cleaners, we need to have CEOs, and just like that. So I wanna before we go deep into the public system, I wanna just ask you a little bit step back. In the private school, you touched on black teachers teaching local, African languages.
Mm.
That has always been my biggest problem. That you'll see, you go to a private school with 50 whatever number, and from that number you only have 4 or 5 black teachers, and all of them, they teach African languages. You go to math, they can't teach math. English, they can't teach English. And and it's always been fascinating to me. Why do we still have such? What's your take on that one?
Actually, I was once directly told that even though, by the way, I am a qualified English teacher with a qualification from Wits University,
Yeah,
but I was told that a black person cannot teach English to white children.
like
And I was
right on your face, like your
right in
face.
my face. In my face, yes. A black person cannot teach English to white
White
children.
children.
And I was told that in the context in which I was trying to apply for a job. And I was telling them that I can teach English. And I was told, nope, that's not happening. You cannot be teaching us our own language. And my argument was, do any of these kids sit at home and their mom says, Nana, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is how to write an essay? They don't learn that at home. So what I'm teaching is mostly the technical side of the language.
Yeah.
I'm not teaching uh, what they're learning at home. I'm teaching them what their parents can't teach them or what their parents are not teaching them. But to touch on that, I'd say that's something that is ignored also. It's something that is not spoken about enough. It's something that goes unnoticed because it can easily be hidden. And the reason why it can easily be hidden is because the private school sector is able to do as it pleases without being monitored by government.
Yeah.
And that's because of the power of money.
Yeah.
In South Africa, money can get you to get away with anything,
Yeah.
you know. And so, and even then, I want you to realize this. Even if they were to start having more black teachers in their schools, having a black teacher does not change the totality of the system itself. Because I personally say the real change will be when you've got black people in managerial positions, and not just managerial in terms of a title, deputy principal or whatever.
Yeah.
It must be managerial from a perspective of decision making power
Sure.
and being able to see actual policy changes that say in our school we want to see a demographic change where we know that this school is in a predominantly white area, but because of the history, we're going to, as a school, make sure that we allocate this number of spaces for specifically black children, black children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's going to be maybe us as a school, that's going to be our project, which is to give back to the community, to correct the wrong of the history. We're going to look for um, talented young people who are dedicated, even if the person's not getting the best grades, but by mere fact that they've got their dedication in point, they show a love for education, a hunger to learn. Let's take this child and give them an opportunity. And yes, that is done to some extent. They'll maybe recruit a young man because he's really good at rugby or whatever, you know. But in all honesty, the reality of it is it's not being done enough. It's not enough to make an actual change in the total reality of our country. You know, so yes, it makes changes in certain individuals' lives, but I mean, let me put it this way: how many schools are on the other side of the freeway? Sorry, there. How many schools are on the other side of the freeway from a township like Alexandra? You know, and how many children from Alex are getting an opportunity to cross over into your Santons and whatever and get an opportunity to get an education there? You know, and but at the same time, I my mind always conflicts me when I come to this conversation, which is to say, I ask myself, why do they have to go to those schools? Why can't our schools be as good?
Yeah.
So I'm always conflicted when it comes to that. I always ask myself, why why did my parents have to take me out of the township to a school in Roodepoort in order for me to get the type of education that they thought was good enough? Couldn't I get the same quality of education where in the community where I live, where I can walk to school, you know? So I mean, for me, certain things point out the quality of a school.
Yeah.
Does the school have a library? Does the school have a fully equipped science lab? Does the school have a computer center which has fully functional computers that the learners are able to use and learn from? You know, those basic things. How many learners, teacher to learner ratio? You know, all those basics that would, in my view, tick off on the basic norms and standards that should be in place for these schools, for all schools.
One last part from that side, from private, then we coming full to the government schools. You touched on a very important part, saying that you were treated with no care. Say, brother man, we have a meeting at 7. We don't care where you're coming from. We don't care what's happening in your life. You need to make it by 7. If you 1 minute after 7, you're late. So that kind of treatment that they gave it to you as a teacher, how likely or what was the possibility of that same treatment to be given to those black children who were in the school? Or they were treated special because they have money, or was the same thing because they looked like their teacher who's from
Well,
Soweto?
let's put it this way: in those type of schools, especially the experience I had,
Yeah.
majority of black children who are in that school don't even want to be identified fully as black. They are black in terms of skin color, but once they step into the schoolyard, they don't even want to speak their home language. To the extent that if I'd say anything in my home language to the learners, you see them cringe, and some of them would even pretend as if they don't understand me. So basically, they walk into that school and cannot be themselves. They walk into there and have to change their identity. Actually, it goes to the extent of this. Some of them, for example, you find that the student is very bright. Their mom is a domestic worker. Oh, by the way, what I'm talking about is a true story,
Yeah.
something that really happened. This child is a child of a domestic worker. They get an opportunity to live in the area with their mother, as well as the lady who the mother was working for, the white lady who the mother was working for.
Yeah.
And eventually, the white lady is the one who is basically taking care and making sure that this child gets into school, gets into a good school. And what actually happened in this situation was that this young black child started identifying the white lady as their mom.
Yeah.
Even in the school setup, they'd say, "This is my mom." All documents, because my mom doesn't know how to read and write, the documents that I need to sign and whatever will be done by this white lady. And eventually, this young child started totally rejecting her own mother and referring to her own mother as the domestic worker. the help lady. So that for me is a total reflection of what happens in the system. Those children walk into the system with a similar identity crisis to what I was going through, many of them. And then when they walk into that system, it's you need to sacrifice who you are in order to fit into the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, maybe they might even do Zulu as a subject because of it being offered in the school. But in all honesty, do they identify with the culture? Do they identify with the way of doing things? Do they identify with the language itself? Do they identify with speaking their home language in the school setup? A lot of the time, no. Actually, the more you can twang, the more you can speak with an accent, the more you can um, even behave a certain way, the more you fit in. The more you'll be in the first team of the soccer team, rugby team, netball team, the more you'll be in the public speaking teams, debating, and all of that. So you work hard to fit in.
Wow.
And eventually, what starts to happen is that there's so much of a break in the identity that in order to fit in and to survive in the schooling system, they have to commit an identity suicide, if I could say, kill
Wow.
off who they really are. And eventually it reaches the point where that child will be so convinced of fitting into this new identity that much later in life, when they have to find themselves, because school comes to an end, then the real world is waiting for you out there.
Yeah, it is.
You reach out there in the real world and you find that you even don't fit in amongst your own black people. You snobbish amongst your fellow black peers, and
Coconut.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the reality that you find in a lot of these schools. So for some of us who walk into the schooling system as teachers, and you find that you did not come from a culture that built you into that environment, you walk in and then you don't fit in.
Yeah.
And then if any of the children are not catching up and fitting in quick enough, especially if it's a child who's not from a rich family, very easily they get kicked out of the system.
Yeah.
If they're from a rich family that has money, money can take you places.
Money
So
can
if
take
you
you
got
places.
money, you don't get kicked out. A lot of the time, children who are from families where the parents are able to pay fees, something will be done.
Yeah.
They'll work hard enough for that child to survive. Even if the child is badly behaved, if your parent is paying fees, man, will make things work.